All right. So Kerrian, thanks for coming on the podcast with me. I appreciate it. I think we were referred to each other through Tara at the Upside, I think, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, I know Erin at the Upside. I haven't met Tara except on email, but she
Yeah, it's
connected
a
the two of
really
us.
phenomenal, I don't know if it's
Community,
a
really,
networking
right?
group, but it's really a community support
Yeah.
group for smaller entrepreneurs and solopreneurs.
Right. Many
Most women,
consultants, right?
a lot of consultants, but so much diversity in the areas that folks specialize in, from e-commerce to financial services, from sales effectiveness to operational excellence to just general coaching. I
Right.
mean, sort of every flavor of intellect and background is represented. A lot are millennials. It's
Okay.
funny to be one of the elder, wiser folks,
Right.
which
That's
was
funny.
fun to have Erin acknowledge. She's like, well, for what you do, having that gravitas, that was her nice way
That's
of
the way
saying
of putting it. That's funny.
elderly, because if I was in e-commerce marketing, maybe not as good from a brand perspective, but for what I do,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
She
know,
was on the podcast. We talked about all the stuff they do at the
yeah,
Upside. And it's mostly women, right? It's not all women, but
mostly women. It's not, meant to be excluding it, but it tends to foster that kind of support network.
sure. Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's go back. Tell me, where you're from and what your background is, because we're going to talk about all that you do with Vibrant Ventures and everything and how you got there.
Sure. So, it's funny. I have one of the craziest, most serpentine career paths known to man or womankind. And so when I do meet young folks who are worried about what they're going to major in college or their first job, I'm like, seriously, do not worry about it.
Right. That's for
So
sure.
even before, if someone's to look at my history on LinkedIn, which is sort of, me as a professional, believe it or not, I grew up as really someone focused on the arts. I was a very serious violinist growing up. I traveled all over the world. I went to Northwestern and was a classical theater major.
Yeah.
And but the nice thing
Evanston,
about
right?
Evanston,
Evanston,
yeah,
Illinois.
Evanston, great town. And
Yeah.
what I love about it is, it's not a conservatory. So I still think to this day, I'm probably the only theater major that ever took physics and calculus.
That's funny.
But I was always curious. I mean, first of all, I'm interested in it. I've now realized that I am a total nerd geek in heels.
Well, they have a very
And
big fine art program, right? It's all
huge. It's one of the top
theater.
theater
Yeah.
program, but also one of the top engineering schools.
Right.
Really,
That's
really
true.
great
Right.
MBA program. If you took grad classes, phenomenal journalism school. I mean, it's very, very rich and diverse as far as the types of styles and intellects that went.
Right. Big Ten.
Yeah, and so our football team was awful, by the way, at the time. So the good
They're a
news
smaller
is
school.
we assumed we were going to lose, so we just drank, and if we happened to win, we just drank more.
They've had some years. They've had,
A few, and certainly once again dating
recently.
myself after I had left. There
Yeah,
was
recently they've
Adam
had some
Barnett,
good
and
years.
somewhat recently,
Yeah.
certainly. But yes, it's sometimes good to have low expectations. So, but it's funny. So I took all of these other classes other than my theater major. I left off Broadway. I was in London, and I quickly realized you can't just love the job. You have to love the lifestyle that comes with it
And that's probably true for anything.
for anything. And you
Yeah.
know what? I was very proud of myself in retrospect that I didn't let my ego get attached to, wait a second, everybody thought I was going for this.
Right. And you
What
get
will they
stuck with
think
that.
if
Can't
I
change.
pivot?
Right.
Because I
People.
was a working actress. It wasn't like I was just a struggling actress, and I just didn't love the lifestyle that came with it.
Now, Kerrian, could you imagine if you're on Broadway today? So you're
Well, I'm
struggling on
very
Broadway and you wait tables to pay your bills and both of them are closed.
Oh, it's
Poor kids.
heartbreaking because I'm still,
Oh,
I've gotten back into really being a sponsor of the arts. I go all the time. My 15-year-old daughter and I, she's a writer. So we've seen, I mean, she's 15 and has probably seen well over 50 Broadway shows. And it's a real passion of mine still as an arts, not as a lifestyle.
right.
And it's breaking my heart what's
Yeah.
happening to
Now they're closed what till January?
at least.
Oh, it's just
At least.
tragic.
And I was about ready to, co-produce a show off Broadway,
Yeah.
going to Broadway. That's interestingly about personal empowerment and finding your superhero inside. So it was a nice meeting of what I do now and my old self, but obviously a little bit on
Well, there
hold.
may be some room next year because a lot of these shows may not open again, the smaller
So
ones,
true. It's really, it's so when we think about all the
Tragic.
devastation
Yeah.
in the various industries. And so
Terrible.
what was interesting is so when I decided to get out of the lifestyle, I said, well, what now? What does this look like? And I ended up on a technology consulting firm, really as a junior marketing assistant kind of thing.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, they thought they might want to do some HR consulting. And so they sent me for some classes at NYU at night.
Okay.
This is where I realized I was highly analytical, because there was a guy, he was one of the preeminent total rewards professionals in the US teaching the compensation and benefits class. I was the only one probably not asleep. I thought it was really interesting.
Okay. Well, that
When
should
people
show you
go into
something.
HR, it's not really because of the numbers, but I really thought of it almost like behavioral economics, right? The psychology behind, not just, oh, you're opening Excel and the math. And so maybe because I was the only one awake in the class, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you
Took a
found it
light.
interesting.
Yeah, he took a liking to me, and we really have formed a good friendship. And when Lehman Brothers was looking for a junior analyst, he knew the recruiter, put me forward. And it was so weird, because here I am interviewing for this Lehman Brothers job. Not a year or two ago, I was doing theater, and I'm competing against all of these like MBAs and like economics majors and things like that. I'm like, what if these things do not belong? And somehow I made it all the way through the interview process, and I spoke with, at the very end, it was me and one other candidate, and so I had to go and meet the SVP of the entire division. And he's still a friend to this day, 25 plus years later. And he goes, so help me understand, like, everybody really likes you, they think you're smart, but I'm not really getting why you're sitting across from me, like, you're theater major, what? And I go, well, Pat, I go, here's perhaps how you should think about it. And I have no idea where I pulled this answer out of. And I go, if you want someone with the most knowledge, right? Someone who's taken these classes and has a certain acumen that they're comfortable with, I'm not your candidate. But let me tell you what it takes in order to be superb in the arts. Nobody tells you how long you need to practice. It's a very nonlinear process, is how you figure out how to be excellent. You just need to have the grit and determination and work ethic to move yourself forward, particularly the type of work I did. It was ensemble work or orchestral work. So
Okay.
you need teamwork. You need to bring those people along with you.
Right.
And then you have to have the courage to actually act, to put yourself forward, to put yourself out there.
Right.
So if you're looking for a mindset or a certain way of being, I'm the person.
Well, you're
If
a
you're
good
looking for someone
salesperson.
with and it was purely authentic. The good news is I had zero to lose.
Right. Of course.
Nobody expected me to be on Wall Street. So, I could go in there and be, as, for lack of a better word, ballsy as I'd
But
like
almost
to
nothing
be.
to lose at that point. So what does it matter, right?
Why does it matter? And I think a lot of my career has been, why the hell not? Like, nobody's ever defined me as this. I've never thought I'd be here. So I might as well be my boldest, most authentic self and see what happens. And so obviously I got the job.
Right.
And, I did the Wall Street Shuffle for many years. Back in the day, every 2 years, a leader would leave. They take their people with them.
Right.
So Lehman Brothers, Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank. Actually, when I was at Deutsche Bank, I got the chance to be on an equity derivative structuring desk for a number of years for corporate and high net worth.
Okay.
Another crazy situation and how I got that. And, it was really just pure fortitude that I think degrees are great, but I always say they shouldn't limit people from having the determination to teach themselves what they need to know in order to be successful.
No, for sure.
And a lot of folks, they don't even put themselves forward because they think, well, they won't even consider me if I don't have X, Y, and Z.
Right, which is totally not true. I think degrees show a commitment to an industry or to your interest in educating yourself and staying up with things. But at the end of the day, it comes down to your fortitude, your personality,
And listen,
your
if I was working, I would have loved
stick-to-itiveness, if
to,
that's a
but
word.
I was the breadwinner, and I was working 88 hours a week. I would have loved to have been able to get my PhD in
Of
organizational
course.
psych or whatever else. It's just, I didn't have the luxury, to be frank. And so, for example, when I was on the derivatives desk, I bought all the textbooks I would have needed to get an MBA. If I couldn't figure a chapter out, I'd highlight it, and then I'd enroll the guys on the trading floor, and it was mostly guys 20 years ago.
Right, sure.
And I said, listen, when I need to learn binomial valuation, we're going to Wednesdays with school night. I brought whoever signed up to a bar, and I said, you're either falling off that stool drunk or I understand this chapter. Whatever comes first.
That's good.
And, listen, it was sort of done tongue in cheek, but I enrolled a lot of folks in my success. As a woman 20 plus years ago on the trading floor, it differentiated myself. I was all about the content. And and so it was interesting because once I figured it out, another very similar and yet different, once I learned how to do that job, I realized it wasn't for me. Just because I could do a job didn't mean I should. It's
Okay.
very repetitive.
Okay.
It's very the sort of similar thing time and time again. And I got a call
Right.
from a recruiter who talked about a situation at Merrill. They were turning around the international division. It was a complete mess. She said nobody wanted this job, and it was perfect for me. I go,
Okay.
gee, thanks.
Yeah.
And I go, but
Right.
I had made an ego. Once again, I can't tell your listeners enough. It is so tempting to stick with what you think your ego, peacock wise wants to flaunt. And I'll be honest, it was tough. Like here was I was this woman who had gotten on the trading floor,
Right.
and I get this call to go into HR again. And I'm like, why would my ego ever allow it?
Right.
And she
Something
said
you'd be
to
like
me,
embarrassed to tell people, right?
yeah, like it would seem like what? Like, well, how does this? And she goes, and she was smart. She was one of those recruiters who really nurtured people's careers. And she goes, let me guess, at this point, you're bored. You're probably the de facto COO, CAO of the desk, doing process improvement and working on strategy. She goes, that's what you love to do. She goes, I know that you're really proud of what you're doing, and it's always going to serve you well, no matter what you do.
Right.
She goes, but be honest with yourself. Have you tapped out your learning of this experience? And I told her she was crazy, and I hung up on her, and I went home and I had a glass of wine, and I just yelled. I'm like, damn it, she's right.
That's
And so
funny.
since then, I've always used that narrative. Is this what is serving my next growth opportunity? Is this and so when I went to Merrill, or then I did Bank of America before they were together. And then I went into tech. I did a lot of turnaround kind of innovation kind of work.
Right.
Um, and it's interesting. I, once again, ego wise, got the big job, the big money, the big office, the big title when I was at Marsh McLennan. And in many ways, once again, very, very proud of what I had done and accomplished. And now in hindsight, this was probably about 8 years ago, I realized massive adrenal fatigue, stressed out of my mind, was not seeing my family the way I'd committed to really being, a still high powered, high performance working mother, but still a mother. And the universe decided to send me a message because I wasn't able to myself. And I went from working 80 hours a week to barely being able to get up a flight of stairs.
Mm.
It took them over a year to diagnose me with very advanced Lyme disease.
It was Lyme.
And so it shut down my pulmonary and my
Right. Of
endocrine
course.
system and everything. And it took them a very long time. I got misdiagnosed for what seemed like forever.
Yeah.
Had to go on disability. While I was on disability, the CEOs changed out. And because I was part of the executive team, like happens in many organizations, they want to bring their own folks in. And I actually like and respect the current CEO very much, but it was a different team. I was on disability, so I got laid off.
Can they lay you off while you're on
They
disability?
can, yeah, they can as
With
well
your
as well.
C-suite, they can do that?
Yeah, you can. And so, listen, I get it. Deck chairs were moving. I was there. And by the way, at the time, I didn't even know I was really ill, but I didn't know it was Lyme. So I had no idea when I'd be better.
Right.
And then, not to get too personal, after 20 years of marriage, and I was home and sick, some things became apparent that I'd always suspected, and I filed for divorce. So
You
it
might as
was
well
sort
do
of
it
a
all. Pull a Band-Aid
perfect
off, right?
storm. All right. It was perfect storm of the universe saying, yeah, this is not what you were meant to be doing. This is
Right.
not how you're meant to be
Well,
living
you
your
seem like a
life.
very A-type driven personality.
Crazy, right? I
Yeah.
mean, very, very, and to be frank, the people I work with right now are very A-type driven,
Of course, that's
entrepreneurs.
who you're going to be attracted to. Yeah.
But the good news is because of my own experience and everything that I've cultivated over the last 8 years, I can basically say it does not need to be mutually exclusive.
Right.
Mindfulness, working on the how and your emotional intelligence is not the sidecar to high performance. It is your backbone. It is your bloodline into accelerated high performance in a way that's sustainable and fulfilling. And to be frank, a ton of fun. Like, let's not forget fun in there. I think
Yeah.
people
Fun
lose
has a
sight of
lot to
that.
do with it. You don't like what you do. I'm sure a
Yeah,
lot of people coming out of this thing are going to change what they did because they didn't like it and they barely made money and they're like,
absolutely. I can't tell you,
you
it's
know,
interesting because my business has both consulting and coaching. The amount of interest on both the millennial and the sort of Gen X side, because there's sort of a different career
yeah, I'm Gen
pivot
X.
point, the amount of interest that I have for both my services and the coaches that work for me has skyrocketed. Because a lot of folks have taken this time and they say, wait a second, this is not where I thought my career was going to be. You know, I did what they told me to do. You know, I've been on this overachiever path since I've been in diapers,
Right.
and I'm completely unfulfilled. I'm stressed out of my mind. I'm not the leader, or to be frank, the spouse or the parent I aspire to be. And in this time, like everything that has worked for them in the past is just making it worse.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because I've had some people say to me, oh, well, those folks, type A folks, never have the humility to ask for help. I go, well, some don't, but
Right.
I absolutely dismiss that notion, because I find them, when they're really willing to have someone that they know, like, and trust and empathizes where they are in as an advisor, they can rapidly see personal transformation
Yeah.
because
And
they're
I,
committed to,
yeah.
they're committed to it. They're all in. They're like, okay, let
Right.
me absorb
Yeah,
this.
of course. They look for that stuff. Most of the people I know that are type A and really driven, they're not, they're not like, what's the word? Closed off to ideas. They're not stubborn.
Exactly. Now,
They're actually the ones looking to better themselves all the time. They're like, oh, I'm driving, but I can be better than this. And they're the ones that do all
absolutely.
this stuff.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
listen, of course, are there narcissists or
Yeah.
all
There's
these
always
jerks
exceptions, every
or
rule.
bullies? Yeah, of course, we've all worked for them.
Right.
And they're not my ideal clients. I would disqualify them. Listen, I've gotten referred to someone, actually it was their spouse. Now I understand why they were having, I'm not a marital counselor,
No,
but
but
I
it was obvious
understood
to
why
you.
they,
Yeah.
when I had this conversation with this guy, I'm like, yeah, I'm actually not really.
No, and that's one of the great things about what you do and what I do. We can choose to do business with people that we like. I always tell people, listen,
Absolutely.
I can be the smartest guy in the world, but if you don't like me, you don't like my style and or whatever. I mean, I'm hard not to like, but you know what I
Exactly.
mean? I mean, there's
No,
always people that are like, yeah,
absolutely.
there's not a fit there. Fine. That's got to
Yeah,
be a fit or I
that's
can't
okay.
help
You know,
you.
the best, what's the saying? The best answer after yes is no.
Right. Of course.
And
Always.
listen, and the nice thing is, because I was so deeply trained, you know, over the last couple of years, you know, 8 years, I've really done a tremendous amount of training in this space. And so I also know so many great coaches who, to be frank, don't want to run a company, don't
Right.
want to do the operations or the business marketing or the sort of relationship development, but they're literally world-class coaches. And so the
Well,
nice
because
thing
they've
is
had a
for
lot of
me,
experience of molding and shaping and learning and educating themselves, all that kind of, they didn't just
yeah,
decide, oh, I'm going to quit my job and become a coach. There are people that do that, you
yeah, but
know.
you know, but they really don't, you know, and once again, they may be good in corporate environments. They don't know how to run their own sort of smaller companies. So
Right.
by attaching to someone like me who actually loves to be a leader, run a company, it's a nice scalable model, because I can come in, work with the founder or the leader of a division or a C-suite, and maybe even their leadership team, but I can then supplement at a different price point and, to be frank, a different style. Listen, there are certain types of folks who work much better with engineers or
Of
lawyers
course. There's always types.
or
I'm not too good with
salespeople,
engineers.
right?
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, it's a broad brush, but I definitely have in um, in my toolkit folks who typically work with different styles better than others. And so it's nice because you can be detached from, is this right for me, versus, are we set up to best serve them? And
That
if
makes
I
sense.
don't think me or my team are in the place with the right skills and tools to best serve them, then I will refer them somewhere else. Perfect example, I got referred to a very senior woman a couple of weeks ago. And I
Okay.
thought, oh, wow, this is going to be good. She's going to be really interesting. I think at another point in her life, it would have been a good match. She's about ready to go through a divorce. I am not a divorce coach.
Yeah. And you don't want to be in the
Been
middle
there,
of that
done
stuff.
that,
Right.
you know, it's too triggering. And of course, do I have the tools to be able to help someone with that? Of course. But it is not my bread and butter. It is not what, to be frank, energizes me. And she would be so much better served. I have a couple of really superb divorce coaches that I know. So I gave her two different styles. And, you know, who knows? Maybe in a year or two when she's on the other side
Yeah.
of, you
Come
know,
back
who
when she,
knows?
right. Now, so
But
you
yeah.
took you made that transition to HR. How long did it take you to kind of go out in the world on your own, so to speak?
So it was interesting. So when I was making my way back from the illness, it's sort of like lions and tigers and bears, oh my. It was illness, unemployment, and divorce, oh my yellow brick road to self-fulfillment. I've got
That's
a book
funny.
in there, by
Yeah,
the way.
there's definitely a book in there.
I've got it. I've
Definitely a
already got
book.
it outlined, and I just
Okay,
need to sit
good.
down and do it. But ironically, I would have never taken the risk because I'd always been in big corporate. I was a COO of a startup tech company. So we were a high-end machine vision AI play in the municipal space.
Okay.
And so it was really fascinating. We ended up it was more the patent portfolio that we ended up monetizing because the municipal sales cycles really, really long and complex. And our CEO was used to being more B2B, B2C, and didn't really have the patience for it. But it was an amazing learning experience for me to really see what it's like in a smaller business, in a completely different ecosystem. And to be frank, for me to get confidence that my instincts on how I lead and run could be portable, because now I had much broader responsibility between business developments, everything other than the tech development basically was my purview. And so I really said, wow, this is really, really fun. And so I went briefly back into corporate to help a friend out who had gotten a job that he just realized he was over his skis on, and it was stable, and it helped my daughter because, there was a lot going on. She saw her mom sick and divorce and
Right. I
everything
can
else.
imagine.
But she's the one that called me out about 2 years ago now, a little over 2.5 years ago. I was in this job. It was fine. It was much smaller than I'd done in a while, but I liked the guy I was working with, and it was convenient to her school. And she just turned 13, and she's like, "Ma, what's going on?" She's like, "You're not being you. You usually are passionate about what you do, and you have fun, and you're innovative." And all. She goes, "You're so bored." She's like, "You're so dialing it in." She's like, she's my little life coach from heaven. And I make all of
How
this.
old is she?
Now she's 15. At the time she
Oh,
was.
so she's young. She's a teenager. Okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
she's shining a mirror in my face. And I do all of this settling language. I'm like, "Sweetheart, it's fine. It's close
Right.
to your school. The people are nice."
Right.
And she had been in this gifted school since she was in kindergarten. She goes, "Ma, all these years you've had me in this nerd school," because she said I need to be enhanced and enriched
We all
and
feel that way, right?
challenged.
Yeah.
And she goes, "Why do you deserve any different?
Smart
Why do
kid.
you deserve any less?" And I'm
Right.
like, "Oh crap. Now I really have to face it, right? Now I really have to model." I was very conscious of what am I modeling for her.
Right.
And, I left this because the friend who had brought me into the organization left. So I'm like, "Oh, there's no reason for me to be here." And I kept thinking about, well, do I go back into these corporate roles? Or do I, people have been telling me for years, for God's sakes, you're so well primed to open your own shop. Like, just do it. And I went on some interviews for some big corporate jobs, and I was just like, could I? Yes, same thing. I just didn't get lit up. And the more I thought about, I don't know, for any of your listeners who really listen to Simon Sinek,
Sure.
when I
I'm
looked
sure
back,
they do. I would guess they do.
and it's really about finding your deepest level of motivation, your why, that plays
Right.
out either personally or professionally. And when I looked back at my crazy career path, which is why I spent time talking about it, from active derivative structure to COO to global head of compensation and rewards, the common denominator has always been for me my passion and just so much fun of unlocking people's and teams' potential
Right.
beyond what they thought was possible and getting them to the highest level of performance. Even though it was scary as hell, they'd have fun and they just soar. Like, they just saw themselves or the team of the organization in a way they never knew was there. And I go, that's what I do. That's what I love. No, forget about the job title. That is what I've done time and time again. So I'm going to make a company on that.
Okay.
So sounds good. So I also knew, because I'm a strategist and I'm chess moves and I've got to know all the answers 40 steps in advance,
Right.
that was not going to serve me. That was not going to serve me because there were too many blind spots. Transformation comes from filling in the gap of what you don't know. And I realized if I waited to have all of that knowledge before I took the leap, I would never leap.
Probably
So
not.
I went against the grain.
What do they say? You can't wait for all the lights to turn green before you head towards town?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I got the name of my company, I got a cool logo, and I just declared it. On LinkedIn.
Now, let me ask you the hard question because it may be no. So
It's okay.
did you sit down and write a strategic, business plan? Like, this is what I'm going to do.
Very high
Not 40
level.
years from now, but I mean,
Very,
yeah.
very high level.
Okay.
What I would say is, and it's funny, it's an advice I've been giving a lot of folks over, particularly in the pandemic, because there's so much we don't know. I find a lot of folks are freezing, the inability to make a decision or put something bold out there because they
Right.
feel like they don't have enough information.
Right.
So what I say is, like, start with a really strong hypothesis. because people feel comfortable pivoting off of hypotheses, right? Because you get different data and it doesn't support or it supports it. And then now what's the new truth? Now what do you put down?
Right.
So I had a starting hypothesis that in order to deliver on, my passion of unlocking potential and performance, is that we were going to do it through two different verticals. HR advisory consulting,
Okay.
more strategic. I call it human capital consulting. I realize with small to mid-sized companies, it sounds a little too schwanky.
Yeah.
It's not meant to sound like schwanky HR. It's just not HR outsourcing, which is incredibly necessary, but it's more of like sort of the lower order Maslow's hierarchy of needs of what a company needs. Like, I'm not going to talk about HR compliance or benefit administration. I might help an organization figure out what they need or if they've got gaps, but
Right.
I'm really the person that will talk with a business leader in business language about where they need to be, where are they now, where do they see their risks, what are they struggling with innovation or productivity or any
Right.
other element of their business. And I am basically essentially the translator into the people elements of how to make that happen, right?
So you work on the people part.
I work on the people part, but I'm also very analytical and numeric. So I'm usually hand in hand with a CFO or a fractional CFO. Because for me, it's all about the numbers. Like, what are you also driving? Like, how do you measure it? How do you drive it?
KPIs and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, reporting analytics, I was one of the first to start, 15 years ago on workforce analytics, or I like to call workforce intelligence. And it's data is usually the start of the really good question, not an answer, right? So when you see
that's an
KPI,
interesting comment because it's true.
and when
Yeah.
you see a number, you're like, well, let's talk about the texture and tone and what else, and how do we pivot and what do we do, versus a lot of folks don't measure it because they feel like they're going to get judged, or when I get it, oh, okay, well, now I'm good.
Right.
It's never, if you exceed a KPI or you miss a KPI, there's still conversation to say. If you exceed it, is it sustainable and repeatable? If you've missed it, is it? But unfortunately, a lot of times it's very flat. It's very two-dimensional.
Right.
And so infusing KPIs and numbers into HR for me has always been about enhancing the conversation so you can refine your actions for highest impact. It's almost like ROI on intentions and actions.
Well, I think it's interesting if we bring it down to the street level a little bit. I think one of the biggest problems people have with even just getting started with writing a business plan, first of all, like you said, they're much too granular. Like, they get caught up on all the details, and it doesn't need to be that way. Plus, it's always going to change, and you're always going to adjust things as you learn along the way.
I talk to people all the time. It's almost like you need
Doesn't have to be perfect.
It's almost like agile technology development. You have to think of in terms of business development, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, like, my hypothesis on the HR advisory side, my towering strength in this space, because I've done pretty much every permutation
In the HR space.
in the HR space, is compensation. I've done every type of.
That's your specialty.
Now, the reason why now I'm a specialist in a lot of things, but this is the thing that
then you're a generalist
plays to, and there's not a lot of us
right
to talk about it. And the reason why I stayed with it so long, I mean, listen, I'm comfortable in numbers, I'm comfortable in deep analytics, but it's not about that. It's because it's the back door into management consulting. 9 times out of 10, when people come to me with a compensation issue and you follow the breadcrumbs, it's about everything else. I mean,
well, because it's all interrelated. And you know what? When companies decouple and it becomes unrelated and they silo the different businesses, they usually fall apart.
Exactly.
And a lot of that comes with a working business plan and solving their problems and approaching things, like you said, from the analytical side of, well, what does this mean? What can I do out of this? What kind of a roadmap or a sign on the road is this, as opposed to, oh shit, we're having problems or whatever.
Exactly. It's like there's no judgment. Like, take out the judgment. It's like not black and white, but okay, what does this say? What do we do about it? How does this let us pivot?
Right.
We're also not swinging, right? Because unfortunately, when they are siloed, people just swing to the opposite often.
Well, because they're doing something and finance doesn't know and operations doesn't know and HR's got no idea what's going on, and it ends up there's huge breakdowns. They don't even know.
Oh yeah. Well, one of my funniest conversations that I've had to mediate, all the time, is because the finance department usually like to claim me and HR like to claim me. And the silliest thing about headcount. So HR cares about bodies.
Right.
Finance cares about chairs. So if somebody's like part-time or they're either job share, they don't care. They care about chairs and overall expense.
Right.
Where the HR, of course, they care about the bodies, the number of people that you have to. And so the arguments that I would have to mediate with regards to headcount, and they'd be like, no, your number's wrong. No, no, your number's wrong. I'm like, actually, you're both right. It's a different lens. What's the
Right.
conversation?
And you can
What's
work
the
together on it.
conversation? It
Yeah.
doesn't, so for me, it's been really, really fun because I think of myself more as a behavioral economist than I do like an analyst.
Okay.
What's the psychology behind like incentive design? What's the psychology even about how you set up people for salary ranges and where you move them in their careers? There's a lot of actions that are even well intended that actually have a really detrimental effect overall on someone's growth and career. So thinking about it, and unfortunately, there's a lot of really well-intended programs out there meant for a small slice, and they forget for every time you try and incent a certain population, you have a
Right.
disproportionate chance of disincenting an entire other population. So you have
Right.
to be very intentional. It's all one big ecosystem, and so you just have to think through it. When I was at Marsh McLennan, one of the talks I give was talking about your people, managing your human capital almost like a financial portfolio. There are short and longer plays, higher, lower risk,
Right.
areas that you need to focus more time and attention on.
Yeah.
It's not one big thing. You have
No.
to average it and have specific intentions depending on your business model and that particular time. Like I'm having conversations with some of my clients now in this area. It's a very different conversation given what's going on in the pandemic.
Very much so.
They have to think about their staff and the role. Forget about the high performers, the roles that are critical, the skill, even let's refine it even more, the skills that are critical.
Yeah.
And to
Absolutely.
sometimes when you really get to a skills base, those skills are in some other job because
Right.
that person may be in IT, but they are really good at dealing with, pissed off people. Well, I'm going to move that person over here and they're going to deal with all the folks who are like freaking out over, but they're in a more linear environment. You would never move someone from something like IT into client service. So
Right.
they have a skill that is critical right now.
Sure. Yeah, I know.
And so it's always interesting. It's always fun. I mean, the other side of our business that I'm incredibly passionate about is, the high performance or executive coaching.
Right.
Because what's really amazing about this is when you work with, a professional or a leader, not only do you transform them,
Right.
but their entire ecosystem.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I mean, what becomes possible for the entire team? It's really, really fun. What's odd though, it's because I'm also not really, I don't do relationship coaching. I mean,
Right.
relationships always come up with my clients eventually, but I'm not a relationship coach. But
Right.
here we are in the pandemic.
Yeah.
Everybody's working remote. And at first I couldn't understand why so many of my clients, there's a very robust assessment that I do with them. And it really helps them see, what's setting them up, what's stressing them out and setting them up for success. It's really
Right.
clear. And I had a bunch of them say, would you mind doing that with my spouse?
Really.
And I was like, I was like, I've never had this before. I go, oh, everybody's quarantined together.
Yeah, they're all interrelated now.
It's in such a more profound way. And what's nice about it is it gives a different language for them to interact, to
Right.
be self-aware, but also recognizing where their spouse is, because they had been trained and they had seen, the benefits themselves, and they could see what was happening
Right.
with their
Yeah.
spouse, particularly we were so stressed out.
No,
So
for sure.
what happens, they were at a loss to explain it. They're like, somebody else needs to kind of have a go at this because this isn't sustainable going forward. So it was funny. Like it was, like I said, I'm not necessarily a couples coach or relationship coach, but it was kind of an interesting.
Well, I think two things can happen during these times. You could get closer with your spouse and it can improve your marriage because you say, oh, I see what this other person's going through and we're going through together, or there's going to be a lot of divorce in the next 6 to.
Oh yeah, the divorce lawyers that I know are sort
Yeah,
of
I
saying,
don't do
oh boy,
divorce. It'd be nice if I did. I'd probably make a lot of money. That and bankruptcy,
yeah.
unfortunately.
But it's so funny. So I know for me, I've been dating, 8 months, and we joke it's like dog years. So we really say we're going to count it as like a year and a half.
Yeah.
So like 4 months pre-COVID, 4 months post-COVID, sort of
Yeah.
like BCAD, and then so
Yeah. COVID's definitely double or triple time.
oh, easily,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because we spoke,
easily.
what, a couple of weeks ago? And then we're like, well, when did we speak? 4 months ago?
I
It's
know. I
like
was going to say
everything's so
April, March,
blurry.
and like no, that was June.
Yeah.
That was
June
that was-
24th. It was late in the month.
wow.
Yeah. You
Great,
lose
time
track.
really does fly. But I mean, the one thing always to look, not to be Pollyanna, right? Not to have this sort of like naive rose-colored glasses.
Right.
What we are all going through right now, the economy, health. So, I mean, everything is so upside down that there's sort of a saying, sometimes you need a breakdown to make a breakthrough.
Yeah. Very often things got to boil over a little bit. Look what's
You know,
going
you
on in the
just have
Black
to be
community right now.
so,
I
oh yeah,
mean,
exactly. So fundamentally off that people have no choice but to just say, I have to try something different, right?
right.
And I
Right.
do think there's a broader skill set consciousness that when hopefully, when this eventually, whatever that new next normal looks like, there will be an enhancement. There will be a better version of a lot of professionals, a lot of families, a lot of partnerships. Um, because I just feel like I'm finding, maybe it's just because of the people I attract, there's more people willing to do the work.
Well,
Because they can,
I think that's because of who you work with. I think the strong will get stronger in this type of environment. And I think some of the weak will get crushed and not get through this because they're too
yeah,
afraid. They don't self-reflect. They don't work with coaches or advisors or mentors or whatever. And they just go to work and they want it. They like that. They wanted to keep doing that and they can't now. And I think it's frightening. And I think maybe that's something you can share in terms of your reflection as to, what kind of things you recommend for people that are dealing with this. And maybe they're not C-suite executives, but they had a job, they were going to New York City. Now their company's going to be shut down till, or at least they're working from home till January if they're lucky,
yep.
because you've seen so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, honor your stress reaction. What I mean by that is, we're all typical flight or fight, right? Become like self-awareness at least makes you not victim to how your
No question
subconscious
about it. And
responds.
that seems to run through everything. And we might have talked about this last time. Consciousness and self-awareness, not self-consciousness, consciousness and self-awareness, right? Because it's a totally different term, ironically. It is huge because you might not realize you're a bad manager because the way you're talking to people, because you just don't realize
You
it,
don't know. It's such a blind spot, right? And by
Right.
the way, once again, don't make it good or bad. It just
Right.
is.
It's not good or bad. It just
And the
is.
question
Right.
is it serving you? So, for
Right.
example, even in these awful times, one of the first exercises I always do with every single client is choosing ways of being. We've all
Right.
spent so much of our time focusing on what we want to accomplish and what we want to do and have, that oftentimes we are completely unaware or not intentional about the who we want to be and what is sort of that space we want to sort of build into and manifest. So like, what are those values that really make sense? And so, for example, like, do you want to be courageous? Do you want flexibility? Do you want abundance? Do you want wisdom? Do you
Right.
want, pick 5. There's an exercise on our website.
Okay.
It's under one of my downloadables for type
We'll
A
put a link in the show
professional.
notes if I remember.
But but even if you don't, just think about what are those qualities that you want to create. Pick 5.
Okay.
Even in tough times, say, what does this look like in this environment? Perfect example. I had a client who was already working with me, and I knew from day one, she's an adventurous soul. She's an adventurous soul. And, hard driving type A professional, very successful. And this all hit. And she's got 3 kids, 2 dogs, a cat, and I think her husband were all home. She couldn't go out. She's trying to deal with the homeschooling the kids. She's still got her full job. Everybody else is freaking out. And she just couldn't get into action. It was like ostrich in hole, head in hole. This is so unlike her. I said, well, let's try out those 5 words that we talked about. And adventurous came in, and I go, well, what would that look like in that environment? She goes, but I'm trapped in the house. I can't go hiking. I can't go skydiving. I can't. I go, I
Right.
know, but what would an adventurous energy in your house, as silly? Let's just be completely silly for a second,
Right.
even if it's impractical. She decided, because she was really struggling, because she was also getting the burden of the housework, she created a scavenger map. So the kids every day would have to find the clue on how they were going to help either dinner prep or clean up afterwards. Silly, right? Completely silly. But she created, well, what if we usually do this and that? I'm like, well, what would that look like? They did it a couple of days. She did a couple of other like she basically gamified the productivity in the house for the
Right.
kids.
Like a work wheel.
Yeah.
Everybody's
And
doing
it just
everything.
really did, kind of made it silly, fun, introduce a different energy. This was just for her kids because they were
Right.
going nuts. All of a sudden she got back into high performance. She's like, oh my God, I feel like I'm myself again. I'm back.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm back. Like I can be adventurous in the how I go about communicating, the ways I add fun and sort of like disruptive or non-conventional ways of doing things. I have that is in my power. And so particularly for those who really feel like they just want to stick their head in a hole, they've gotten to a point where they've almost like they can't even act, they're so shut down. What you can do is then step into the who you want to be. And so I have a couple clients like courage, the courageous. I'm like, well, what does little doses of courage look like in this environment? What does that look like for you? And they're like, well, for one, it was having a difficult conversation with somebody at work. She's like, I feel like I don't have permission to have that in this environment. I'm like, well, why? She goes, well, courage and kindness. Courage doesn't need to be. And she's like, oh, okay.
Right.
Courage for somebody else was just getting out of, honestly, getting out of bed every day felt pretty courageous. But
Right.
when you know that it's within your control and life isn't happening to you, that there's your authentic self can show up powerfully, even in the most difficult of circumstances, you start to take your power back and you start to get momentum again. And this isn't to say days aren't really tough.
No, they're
The days that
difficult.
are really hard, but
Yeah.
who you are in those difficult circumstances makes all the difference.
I think one of the problems with this whole situation, it was totally unknown. So a lot of people, including myself, you started off on this thing thinking, oh, in a couple of weeks we'll be back to work. And I'm sitting on my couch with my laptop and I was, barely getting dressed in the morning and this and that.
Yeah.
And then, certain people, like you said, stick their head in the sand and they start living like that. And then other people, probably the high performers like you're working with, and like myself, I said, this is going to go on for a while. So I got to get back to, how am I going to create a routine in the house that gets me up? And maybe I'll be wearing shorts, but I'm going to put on a nice shirt. I'm going to show up at these meetings looking like a professional and like a real person. And it got me back into and then coming back to the office wasn't that difficult because it was really just moving my equipment and getting set up. And then I was ready to go, plug back in and I have these meetings tonight, so I'll do them from home. I have a mic and a laptop.
Yeah.
So, I think that, and a lot of the uncertainty caused that. Like if we knew, listen, this is going to happen for 3 weeks and we're going to be done. We can all put up with this BS for 3 weeks and be totally unproductive. But after that, you start to kind of fall apart.
Yeah. And it's understandable. Listen, it's so understandable not to feel overwhelmed by looking so far in advance and what is the fall.
Yeah, right. And that's frightening, especially when you don't know what the hell. Far in advance, because the world could end in 4 months.
Yeah, I mean, I said aliens.
Dies.
Who's got aliens on their bingo card for August, right? But what we do have control of is the who we want to be and how we want to show up and how we handle these micro moments, right?
Right.
It's literally the only thing in our control. And it was what I remembered learning back when I was going through that trinity of trauma, right? The illness and unemployment.
Trinity of trauma. That's a good word.
And
those things happen in threes. Isn't that ironically in life?
Absolutely. And it's ironic. I'd had another 3 bad ones when I was my early 20s, which had really calcified this hard driving type A person, because that was my survival mechanism in order to deal with the death of my twin brother and a couple of other things. And so I went so detached from my heart and my intuition, I went all into my head. And so until it ran out and that no longer worked for me, and I had to round myself out. And I mean, I joke all the time. 10 years ago, I was the person making fun of people in the self-help aisle.
There you go.
I was. I mean,
Yeah.
until when people say these people will never, I'm like, oh no, you didn't know me 10 years
But
ago.
you changed and you made a paradigm shift and you started seeing things differently,
Absolutely.
whatever reason it happened.
Absolutely.
You know,
And
sometimes
it's
it's
there.
out, you ever read that book Outliers, one of the
Oh,
Malcolm
sure.
Gladwell books?
Well, absolutely.
I mean, there's usually people that are, you know, going another path. Something happens that there's some intervention. They run into somebody, they find somebody, they have an experience in life
Yeah.
that, you know, changes them.
Absolutely. And listen, I had that before the first tornado of trauma in my 20s. And listen, I was an actor and a musician. And so my intuition and my heart, like emotions obviously were rich. I had just entirely shut it off and just like over dominated. So one an exercise I learned a number of years ago, and I also love doing with my clients, and they always think I'm going somewhere different with it. So I say, list your top 3 strengths. And then
Okay.
they get all like, oh, this is going to be fun. I'm going to talk about how great I am at these different things. And so we'll go through them. And then I say, well, when is that not serving you? So a
Right.
perfect example, when I did this exercise, I'm very, very proud of the fact I've been independent financially, personally, since I've been young.
Right.
You know, I'm always been on my own, handling my own stuff. So in being independent was so part of how I defined myself as a being that I was really, really bad at depending on people.
Right.
And guess what? You have to depend on people. If you're going to sustain yourself, if you're going to like not have massive adrenal fatigue, and by the way, if you want deeper, authentic relationships, it's got to be a two-way street. And so when they said, you know, it's not that that isn't a towering strength and you should still be independent. Of course not. The question is where using that muscle
Mm-hmm.
is actually, once again, not in service to what you're trying to create. Another example, which goes to that type A and how I sort of reformed, I was always very proud. It's going to sound egotistical, but I was really smart. Yeah, I'm really smart. But
Right.
what did that allow me to do? You know, because I was a masculine dominated industry, I did not trust my feelings or my intuition. That does not serve me. Quantum living and quantum being comes from marrying your head, heart, and gut. And so I completely cut off these power centers.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, and it's not that I don't use my brain, and it's not that it's not incredibly important. It's just not the totality of what I have available to me.
Right.
And so, you know, for those of you on the podcast, think about what are your top 2 or 3 towering strengths, and yay, awesome. But where are those areas where they're boomeranging around and kind of hitting you in the head? They're actually really not being of service to you.
Right.
They're cutting you off in the knees. And what could replace it? Because we have an infinite array of possibilities of who we can be
Right.
beyond who we ever defined ourselves as. And even if you think it would be highly uncomfortable, from a complete place of play, just play with it. I'm kind of curious. I wonder what would that look like if I were to interact through this lens. I wonder what would be possible.
Yeah.
It's really, you know, the good news is it's real. People rarely think in terms of themselves and play, but it's
But
all
you have
within
breakthroughs that way.
control.
You break out
Yeah.
of old patterns and bad habits.
And there's no consequences. So you try
Right.
and it doesn't work. So
Do
what?
it in private.
So what? You know, you try it with one friend, you try practice on, one meeting, you
Right.
practice, what? So what's the worst that can happen? You
Well,
know,
isn't that always the question? People are afraid of doing something. What is the worst that can happen?
right. And then they go, well, this will happen. I go, and then what? And they're like,
Right.
this can happen.
Then
I
the
go, and then
conclusion
what?
is,
And we
yeah.
do 6 and then what? And they're like, yeah, a lot greater upside than the risk. And listen, it's always important to risk mitigate. Listen, at the end of the day,
Well,
when I
of
talk about
course. That's how you,
innovation with my, businesses, and you get those naysayers that always, people complain about,
right.
or shut down innovation. They've got their place. It's just, are you putting them in the right place? Right? So and then one, and then one, and then what, it does help critical thinking in a business development perspective.
Right.
In personal development, it can sort of
Well,
shut.
there's a difference between taking risks and being totally reckless with your own
Exactly.
self-being and self-worth. I mean,
Exactly.
then you're in bad
Exactly.
shape.
So yeah, so as you can tell, I really don't like what I do.
Yeah,
I'm like
exactly.
joking.
Well, I appreciate
But
all the
yeah,
time you spend with me. Let me ask you this question. How can people interact with you if they want to find you? in the
Sure.
world of cyber
So I'm a
space?
modern woman with all of these as my company with all these different places. So first and foremost, I have a pretty robust website that I'm
Okay.
very proud of. So it's www.vybrant.com, but I will
Okay.
spell it for you because it's a little different.
Right.
Vybrante.
Okay. And we'll
And
put that
I'm
in the
not a
show notes
bad
anyway.
speller.
Okay.
We did it for a reason. So the premise is to unlock individual, team, or organizational vibrancy. Is you have to understand your why, your true north,
Okay.
and in the end,
Oh,
it's
there you
about your
go.
energy. It's about your E factor.
Okay, good.
So Vybrant.com. My name's Kerrian Fournier. My spelling I cannot take credit for. The weird spelling on that one that I give to my mom. That's Kerrian at
Okay.
Vybrant.com. Kerrian Fournier LinkedIn, Vybrant Ventures IG, all of that, all of your common. The only thing I have not really attached to and leveraged to date is really Twitter.
Yeah, I'm not a big text person. I mean, I put things, I use the marketing system I use. I just press a button and it goes onto Twitter, but I don't really.
Yeah, I just, you know what, I think early on I sort of fell out of that, thing, and just I felt it didn't serve me as well. And
Yeah.
I think LinkedIn is probably my main place that I post.
Yeah. I had
I do
somebody
a
on my
lot of writing.
podcast when did I have her on? Well, before Corona, maybe last fall. And she's a small business media influencer and writer and stuff. So she does a live Twitter chat like every Thursday night.
Wow.
And it makes me dizzy. I mean, I can't
See,
keep
I'm
up
the
with all the
same way.
texting and the typing and
I
everything.
think that's part of it for me too. And I knew the effort I would need to even become functionally adequate, not even superb at it, was probably beyond, you know, like my
Yeah.
capabilities
It's
of
like
function.
subtitles on movies. I can't watch movies that are subtitled. I miss the whole movie. I'm
Yeah,
reading,
exactly. I know. I'm with you on it. So
and my
absolutely.
wife would be like, "What do you mean? Did you just watch the?" No, it's
Yeah,
yeah.
no.
I
I'm
don't do it.
with you. So, but I post a lot on LinkedIn. I've been doing
Okay.
a lot of blogs and articles for Thrive Global and my own blogs. Because
And you
I
said there's some tools on your website.
There's some
To,
great tools. There's 4 different downloadables depending on if you're a leader for an organization or personal development. Yeah,
and for
so
consultants, you recommend the Upside. You like the community.
I do. I think they're really strong group of professionals. I mean, not just, they're so smart.
Yeah.
These women are so smart. I mean, I definitely feel like I'm swimming with upper echelon types of
Right.
professionals.
Smart and confident. Like I
Yeah,
just get that from Erin when I talk to her. Yeah.
yeah, confident and also willing to learn. Like, it's that, confident and
Right.
saying,
Not cut off, not
yeah, not
close-minded.
tough. They're like, because we all have our specialties and we all realize sort of the wisdom of crowds. And we
Yeah.
all have such complementary skill sets that together you put it all together.
Right. Well, it's a
And
community of betterment, right? I mean, you're all looking to better each other.
yeah, so
Yeah.
listen, I need a patent attorney on something or IP. I've got someone. I need someone who's a sales marketing guru. Great. I need someone who's a PR maven. Got it. I need
Right.
whatever it is, right? So it's really been a wonderful experience. So
All right. Good.
yeah,
Well, I appreciate it very much for you coming on.
my pleasure.
And